everyone. My name is Alexis Clark, and this is my fieldwork interview with Dr. Vera Clark, a special educator and professor of over 20 years in the Chicago public school system.
Hello, my name is Dr. Vera Clark. I initially began teaching in 1973. Long time ago, huh? I work with students who had behavioral disorders. They've been identified as learning disabled, and those who were cognitively delayed. At that time, we called them educable mentally retarded. And it's been a rewarding career. It was very rewarding. I learned a lot about the students. I also learned a lot about myself, how much I could deal with, how much I could find an answer for whatever it is I had to deal with. And it was rewarding.
Can you please tell us in as much detail as possible about your job as a special education teacher?
As a special education teacher, my job was very involved, as you will find yours. Besides trying to teach children various skills academically, we also have to teach them behavioral skills because many of them are lacking there. In terms of social behaviors, how to get along with other students, and social emotional types of things. I used to have one student who would get upset about the least little thing. So I had to try to talk with him on his level about getting so upset about minor things. Of course, they were minor to me, but they were important to him. So we continued on that road until he actually became a little bit better, which was very good. I worked with him for about 3 years, as well as his mom. So, in addition to academic skills and social emotional skills, we have to sometimes work with them about independent skills, things that they need to learn to do in terms of physical hygiene, washing their hands before they eat and after they go to the washroom in particular, and understanding that other students have issues as well. They're not the only ones that get their feelings hurt. They hurt other people's feelings. They have to understand that. Some of them don't understand that. In the general education classroom, actually, my role is to corroborate with the teacher and help him or her understand what the student may need, and that patience is the key. And we need to work together and on the same thing. We can't work separately and expect the student to learn. We have to be able to communicate with one another on a continuous basis.
May I ask, how often did you meet with the general education teacher to discuss your students with learning disabilities?
I try to meet with them at least once a week, at least. Especially when the student wasn't doing very well. We need to talk about some strategies, and that, in fact, will help the student. And we need to talk about how often we have communicated with the parent and give the parent some strategies. We did that. Not as often as I would like to, because you have to remember the regular ed teacher has a lot of students in the classroom, and many of them need special education, but they don't get it. So a lot of them have special ed students in their classroom, and you can give them some strategies to help with their learning, as well as the special ed teacher or the regular ed teacher can give you some strategies.
That's excellent. I think it's great that you and the general education teacher were such great team players, meeting to discuss your students on a weekly basis and how they could do better in their education. How did you build meaningful relationships with parents?
Okay, that's an issue because a lot of parents don't want their students in special ed because it's too much of a marker for them. But I would try to console the parent in that your child is lucky. There are students in special ed there are students in regular classrooms that need to be in special ed classrooms. But your child was identified. And so we're working with your child very closely. And if you have questions or concerns, always call me. We can make an appointment. You can come and we can talk about it. I would tell them that, and many of them did that. They did. So that helped a lot. Just communication. Communication is key with your parents.
What is your perspective about inclusive education?
And by inclusive, we mean that
By inclusive, we mean the opportunity for special education students to learn in the same classroom as students without disabilities.
Okay, actually, I believe there should be inclusion because the world is not selective in terms of special ed versus general ed. I think that special ed students need the experience with regular ed students. They need the experience with just social, emotional types of things with the general population. I believe in inclusion. But inclusion overall doesn't mean that they need to be put in a classroom and ignored, just be in the classroom, no. They've got to have some individualized attention as well as some of their other students. So I think inclusion is important for the students' personal growth as well as the general population's growth. They can see that these students are people just like them.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's definitely important to include students in a least restrictive environment, even if a student has an emotional disorder or behavioral challenge. I think it's still critical for students to have a formal classroom experience, and even if the student is only allotted 80% of their classroom time with students with disabilities in the general education classroom, at least they still get an opportunity to feel normal, or they get an opportunity to feel included with the other students who may not have the same challenges. Throughout this interview with Dr. Vera Clark, I learned several key concepts demonstrating class content from SPED 461. During week 2, our class learned about the history of students with disabilities. Dr. Clark illustrated that every student deserves to have the equal opportunity for an appropriate, free learning experience because all children have the capability to learn. Special education teachers' role for students with disabilities is critical while practicing active intervention of quality and optimism, which subsequently develops a cycle of success. After synthesizing who benefits from special education, remediating, fixing other people's children by Ellen Brantlinger, in the 2-part Week 2 class lecture, I learned that the history of special education derives from an aggressive past associated with war, restoration, genocide, and economic advancement. Dr. Vera Clark's expertise encompasses the rich history of special education from the lens of a retired Chicago public school teacher and psychologist for Perkins Bass Elementary School in Inglewood, Chicago. Thereafter, she earned her doctorate at the Chicago State University and was a professor of psychology at the same institution. Throughout the interview, Dr. Clark connects her experience to class content, including topics such as segregation, inclusion, identification, and the individualized education plan. Here is a summary of how the concepts discussed during the fieldwork interview were applied to enhance my learning. Segregation. Dr. Clark was a special education teacher in the Chicago public school system at Perkins Bass Elementary School in Inglewood, Chicago. The racial demographic of students in this impoverished Southside neighborhood is 90.2% African American and 5.2% Hispanic. Throughout this interview, our featured guest highlights that students of color are marginalized in special education programs because of economic classism. Black and Latinx students experience disproportionality in special education and are seen as troublemakers in school environments. Waytaller 2024. The segregation of students of color causes tension in public districts due to the obvious stigmatization and dangerous racial profiling. My grandmother worked for over 20 years to ensure that her elementary level students reached levels of achievement as potential contributors to society. Even though children with disabilities are protected through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, students are falsely accused, identified, and segregated, which causes tension across special education programs in our nation. Inclusive education is characterized by presumed competence, authentic membership, full participation, engaged social relationships, and high learning standards for both students with and without disabilities in the general education classroom. Inclusive education is critical to the equality of learning for children across the United States. Dr. Clark mentions in the interview that she has a social constructivist perspective of inclusion in the classroom. This means that students with disabilities should learn in the same classroom as students without disabilities, with any necessary modifications or accommodations to ensure all students have equal access to education in order for them to achieve success. Before 1975, the history of schooling for students with disabilities in the United States was marked by exclusion. Only 1 in 5 students with disabilities were educated in public schools. For example, New York State imposed a law for school districts to provide an education to students only with IQs below 50 because children were continuously denied services. Some states had strict laws excluding children from public education who were considered crippled, feeble-minded, or emotionally disturbed. Hence, it was not until the enactment of the Education for All Handicapped Children Act in 1975 that students with disabilities received a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. Burns and Dooley Marling, 2014. Regardless of their physical, intellectual, social, or emotional differences, teachers should practice inclusion by instructing all students in the same classroom setting as a tactic and statement of value. Rather than focusing on deficits to be remediated, educators should support an abundant philosophy that presumes an optimistic explanation of thinking, learning, and ability. For example, teachers can use culturally relevant pedagogies such as universal design for learning to acknowledge and build linguistic and cultural knowledge. Universal design for learning makes education more inclusive and effective by offering multiple means of representation, expression, and engagement. Diversity benefits children by promoting mutual respect, understanding, and development of social and academic skills. Even if a child with disabilities requires assistive technology, specialized instruction, or behavioral interventions to help them succeed alongside their peers, the achievement of non-disabled students will demonstrate improved academic performance and social behaviors because of their awareness of others' needs, while developing the skills necessary to respond to those needs. By focusing on reforming traditional structures of schooling, all students can express their intrinsic identity. This fieldwork interview, coupled with Week 14's lecture and text on the social model of inclusion, has deepened my understanding of the importance of reducing barriers, challenging stereotypes, and promoting a more equitable education experience for all students through inclusion. Identification. When there is concern that a student may have a disability, they are often referred to a school's multidisciplinary team, which includes professionals such as the student's parents, general education teachers, and specialists qualified to conduct individualized assessments. Before the student can be placed in special education or receive related services, they must first be identified as having an IDEA disability and requiring special education to address their individual needs based on evaluation data. The evaluation data plays a critical role in the development of the student's free, appropriate, public education, or FAPE. Parental written consent is required before conducting an initial individualized evaluation. Once consent is obtained, the evaluation must be carried out in a timely manner. If the student is found eligible, the team will then identify the student's specific needs. The U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Andrew F. v. Douglas County School District in 2017 emphasized that these decisions should be based on the student's academic and functional needs, as determined by the individualized comprehensive assessment. Additionally, the multidisciplinary team must consider other factors such as the student's disability, their potential for growth, and the views of their parents. The purpose of the assessment is twofold. First, to determine the student's eligibility for special education services, and second, to assess their educational needs in order to plan an appropriate individualized education plan, or IEP. It forms the foundation for establishing educational goals, determining the special education services the student will receive, and monitoring their progress. The assessment must be individualized, meaning that the methods and procedures used in the evaluation must be tailored to address the unique needs of a student, rather than using a generic approach applicable to all students. The assessment process provides a baseline of measuring the student's progress and determining the appropriate interventions. Multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS, and response to intervention, or RTI, are multi-tiered instructional frameworks designed to meet the needs of all students, including struggling learners and those with disabilities. These systems are implemented school-wide and integrate assessment and intervention at various levels. MTSS and RTI aim to maximize student achievement and reduce problem behaviors by providing a structured system of support. These frameworks are particularly effective in early detection and intervention for students who are struggling within the general education setting. A typical MTSS framework is designed to provide a comprehensive approach to address both academic and behavioral challenges. At the first tier, all students receive high-quality, evidence-based instruction in the general education classroom. For students who require additional assistance, Tier 2 provides targeted interventions, which may include small group instruction or specific behavioral strategies. If students continue to struggle, Tier 3 offers more intensive individualized support, ensuring that academic and behavioral needs are addressed through personalized interventions. In the RTI approach, the progress of struggling students is regularly monitored to assess whether they are making sufficient growth, which is referred to as responsiveness, after receiving high-quality instruction. For students who do not show adequate progress with research-based instruction in the general education setting, they are provided with more intensive and evidence-supported interventions to address their needs. Dr. Clark discusses critical concepts about the identification of students with disabilities in public education, which directly connects to class content. While emulating Week 10's lecture, the IRIS module on RTI, and Chapter 9 of our Special Education Law course textbook, Dr. Clark provides essential insights into how students with disabilities are identified and supported within the public education system. IEP. The Individualized Education Plan is a critical document for students with disabilities, as it ensures they receive a personalized and legally mandated educational plan designed to meet their unique needs. It provides a clear roadmap for the services, supports, and accommodations a student requires to succeed in school, including specialized instruction, behavioral strategies, and modifications to the curriculum. The IEP is developed through collaboration between educators, specialists, and the student's parents or guardians, ensuring that all aspects of the student's academic, social, and behavioral needs are considered. By creating specific, measurable goals, the IEP serves as a foundation for monitoring the student's progress and adjusting the plan as necessary to ensure ongoing success. To prove that achievement goals are more than de minimis, educators can use the SMART acronym. An IEP-related interpretation of the acronym is specific, measurable, action verbs, realistic, and time-limited. In addition to these features, well-written IEP goals reflect students' unique strengths and needs. Week 8's reading illustrates that using the SMART acronym as a guide, educators can produce specific, measurable, realistic goals with action verbs. Despain and Heaton. Writing IEP goals, however, begins with students' present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. To write an effective IEP for a child, individuals combine their knowledge, expertise, and commitment to design an educational program that must help the child progress in the general education curriculum. The individuals that come together to form an IEP team for a student are parents, special educators, regular educators, a representative of the school system, someone to interpret evaluation results, others with knowledge of special or special expertise about the child and the student with the disability. Center for Parent Information and Resources 2024. Schools must follow both the procedural and substantive requirements of the IEP to ensure that a student receives an appropriate education. Overall, an IEP is similar to a contract where school personnel agree with the student's parents to provide a set of services and supports for the student throughout the upcoming year. Every facet of the student's special education program is guided by the IEP and monitored throughout the IEP process. Dr. Clark reflects on class content by sharing her experience on IEP teams as a special education teacher in Chicago Public Schools. Her experience highlights being a cooperative team player with the general education teacher, frequent communication with parents, and implementing teaching practices that reference clear IEP goals. Thank you so much for watching my fieldwork interview with Dr. Vera Clark. As an experienced special education teacher and professor of psychology, Dr. Clark educated children from kindergarten to 3rd grade for over 20 years, from 1973 until 2003 at Perkins Bass Elementary School, a Chicago public school. While primarily teaching students of color, Dr. Clark was dedicated to academic progress, leading to life opportunities. Throughout our interview, Dr. Clark's shared experiences directly correlate with class content, which expanded my perception of special education. I hope viewers were able to gain applicable information that benefits educational goals for students who receive free and appropriate public education. Thank you so much for watching.